Now, as someone who deals so much with the world, I want you all to understand today how the world is thinking about us. And I want to share with you 10 reasons why today the world is looking at India with a different sense of respect, with a greater sense of partnership, and with a desire for closer engagement. These 10 experiences which I share with you are, in many ways I can say, are first-hand impressions. And so let me start with what I believe certainly in the last 2 or 3 years has made a really big difference. And that is actually our handling of the COVID. Very, very early on, when COVID first came, there was a genuine worry in the world. How countries which did not have a strong public health system, a very robust infrastructure, no social safety net, how will such societies cope with the COVID? And actually, in many of the high-level conversations, even at a G20 level, often India would be mentioned as a source of worry for the world. 3 years later, when we look who fared in what manner, yes, everybody, the entire world took a hit on COVID. I mean, I think there would not be a single person in this room, or probably in this city, maybe even in this country, who has either not had it themselves, not lost someone near and dear. I mean, no question it has been a traumatic experience. But when we see who came through it and in what manner, I think the world sat up and really took notice of India. Many of you would have heard me on YouTube speaking about some experiences. I want to tell you most of those stories are actually true. There is that story of my taking my son out in New York, where he took out a kind of folded slip from his wallet as his certificate, and I showed my phone. That actually happened. When I went around telling people what our vaccination rates were and how well it was organized, I would actually, this itself would be a subject of discussion and fascination. But in all of this, I think people saw two very big differences in the India of the last few years and the India of the previous image. One was the fact that we produced vaccines on a scale and with an efficiency and with a timeliness that the rest of the world really came to admire. And the second, that we, a nation which was always last in the queue waiting for other people to do their stuff and then eventually it would come to us, we actually had not just made in India vaccines, we actually had invented in India vaccines. Now, it's a different matter that some people ran it down. But trust me, I took the Covaxin and I at least went through more than 2 years of visiting hospitals, of going to places where COVID was very much rife. It took about 2 years for the vaccine to catch up, for the virus to catch up with me. The second reason was actually our economic recovery. Now, when economies start to contract as the COVID, many places shut down, we also had our lockdown. A lot of advice was given about how governments should handle this. And a lot of governments spent a lot of money. They gave away enormous amounts of money to companies, to various institutions in the hope that they would pump prime the economy and that this would soften the impact of the COVID. As a minister, I'm the foreign minister, of course, but I also had two other responsibilities at that time. We had a group of ministers who were charged with dealing with the COVID. I was one of them. There are also a group of ministers who deal with the economy. That's a standing group. I'm part of that group as well. Now, when we discussed how to handle with the COVID, the economics of it, Prime Minister Modi was very clear that he would spend the money, the taxpayers' money, very carefully, very prudently. He will give it to the people, directly make it available to the people, rather than give money in a way in which, somewhere it kind of got lost on the way. So the result was, after 2.5 years, when everybody was taking stock, how is your economic recovery? How is your public finances? How much more debt have you incurred? What has been the impact on your people? Today, it's not an accident that we are the fastest growing large economy in the world. It's not an accident. It is an outcome. It is an outcome of leadership choices. And in fact, we often speak about Make in India. I want to tell you, at that time, I saw a thought process in the Prime Minister's head, which was made in India. He understood how India works, thinks, how India reacts, and that is how he fashioned his policy. So people today, the world today, actually not only admires the manner in which we dealt with the COVID, they actually respect the way in which we handle the socio-economic challenges of that time. And particularly, I would say, the manner in which issues of social stability, of food support, of financial support, of employment, how was the informal economy dealt with? These were all today factors in how the world looks at us. Now, every country finally develops a reputation on how it looks after its own people. I've spoken to you about how we dealt with at home. But we are one of the countries which has the largest number of people outside India. We had 1 million students, people just like you, who were at that time abroad. In many cases, their hostels, their countries told them, COVID, shut down the hostel, please take the flight and go back. And most of the time there was no flight. Now, we had people who were seafarers, who were in merchant shipping, large number of people who were tourists, there were blue collar workers, there were many IT people who had gone out on jobs. So, that whole, I would say, responsibility, how do you take care of a large number of people abroad? That is what we also demonstrated during COVID through the Vande Bharat mission. And in the Vande Bharat mission, we brought back 70 lakh people, 70 lakh, which actually, honestly, in the history of the world, nobody has ever done. But I'm now giving you COVID. We had a much more recent challenge, which was last year, the conflict in Ukraine. Again, we actually had young students involved. We had about 20,000 students. A few of them went back in response to our advisories. But the bulk of students, want to stay. They do not want to leave their studies. It's entirely understandable. Now, how to bring them back in the middle of a conflict? That too was something which was a very big responsibility. But there again, no country ran the number of flights. We did 90 flights to bring back our students. We went to every one of the neighboring countries. In every case, a minister was sent saying, you go there, you stay there, you will be there till the last person boarded the flight. And people saw two things there. The world saw, here is an Indian government willing to use everything, including the Air Force, to bring back its people, which takes its responsibility seriously enough to send 5 cabinet ministers, saying, you will personally sit there till our students come back. Now, one part of it is looking after your own. It's in a way very natural. I think what has also changed with us, which the world has taken note, is we have started to also respond to the needs of other people. We've been doing it, over the years, after 2014 especially. Some of you will remember the Nepal earthquake. There were some challenges in Sri Lanka and Maldives. But just a few weeks ago, what happened in Turkey. When the earthquake hit Turkey and Syria, literally within a matter of not even an hour, I would say an hour, a little more than an hour, already the Prime Minister said, you need to get a force out there. We need to, because we have disaster relief capabilities. We have mobile hospitals. How quickly can you get them out there? And again, literally within 2 days, we were there. From the time he gave the green signal, it took us less than 2 days. And, you don't have to necessarily, be shaped by what I am saying. Sometime look at the YouTubes on what the Turkish public says about the Indians who are there running a hospital. They're actually running a hospital in a school out there. Now, those are the kinds of things today that shape the image of India. If you ask me, pick a single thing in the last 5 years, I would say it is Vaccine Maitri. It's Vaccine Maitri because, every September, there's this UN General Assembly. Last September, a bunch of countries actually came to us and said, we'd like an event where we want to tell you what we think about you. Because we are all recipients of your vaccines and Vaccine Maitri. And you should hear them. They really, I would say, you cannot be unmoved by what you hear. The foreign minister of Jamaica, who's a lady, she actually says, I have Vaccine Maitri inside me. That is the kind of impact today that we are making in the world. But one part of it is, how we govern at home, how we look after our people. Yes, there's the part how we contribute to the world. But every country, because it's a very competitive world, every country is also tested. We all face security challenges. We come under public pressures. So I give you 2 more examples why the world today thinks of us differently. You saw that during the Ukraine conflict, we came under a lot of pressure from some Western countries that while they wanted to keep their freedom to buy energy from Russia on terms and pace which they wanted us really to sacrifice the interests of the Indian consumer. No, we stood firm. We stood firm publicly. And I would say this to you, across Asia, across Africa, across Latin America, a lot of other foreign ministers, sometimes even prime ministers and presidents, basically told me or told Prime Minister, saying, look, we admire what you did. Many of us had that feeling. Not all of us had the ability or the courage to say it. That is also something today the world takes. I'll give you a different example. Some years ago, we revived a platform called the Quad. It's a group of India, USA, Japan and Australia, because we felt we had a lot of common interests. Now there was a lot of pressure, you can guess from where, not to do it. Now 10 years ago, in 2007, actually we had tried Quad the first time, there was pressure and the 4 countries gave up on the Quad. This time, we stood firm. So when you stand firm on tough issues at a global level, the kind of, I would say, the kind of respect that you generate is actually very, very different. But sometimes it can be, you don't have to go out in diplomacy or in a, I would say, in a global arena. It can be right at our border. How a country behaves when its security is threatened, when its people are attacked, that too is a judge of our character. So, if you compare what we did after Mumbai 26/11 with what we did at Uri and Balakot, the world draws a message from it. When you see our soldiers after 2020 deployed in the northern borders, in the Himalayas against China, and you compare today how we are supporting them, sustaining them, making sure they have the capabilities. The world remembers how were these people in 1962, how are they today. This is also something. The willingness to stand up to coercion, stand up to pressure, stand up when your national security and your core interests are at stake. In recent years, we have also had, a number of issues on which India has been a source of ideas, sometimes a suggester of initiatives. So you can see that in terms of, the International Solar Alliance today, which has done more than anything else to propagate solar energy. You see this right now in something called the International Millets Year. That too is something which is very important for food security. When it comes to disasters, because in this, as climate change increases, there will be more and more disasters. India was the first country to propose a global coalition for disaster resilience. So we are no longer today the receiver of ideas or the receiver of assistance or the receiver of, what other people give to the rest of the world. We are also today a contributor. We are a giver. We are a provider. We are a responder. That is today the changing image of India. But in the final analysis, what the world thinks about India is determined by 2 factors. One, the buzz, the energy, what they sense is happening in India. And most of all today, this is visible in the digital domain. The scale of what we have done digitally. When I go around talking to people, saying, we deliver food to 80 crore people. We give money in the bank accounts of 40 crore people. Even the Ujjwala, the gas cylinder, is given to 8 crore people. The number of family members who have benefited from housing provided by government is 13 crores. So these are, for the world, fantastic figures. And the countries with less population marvel at the figures. But there are many countries who say, we have the same problem. I've actually had a president who made me sit for half an hour and made me talk about all of this because he said, I have the same leakage issue in India, that in my country. So when I explained to him how leakage in India was cut, how those days when, 100 rupees left Delhi and 15 rupees reached the recipient, how that era is over, it's something which is of enormous interest. The other, of course, is people today see the personality of India. the fact that we today are culturally proud. We are not today trying to be an imitation of other cultures. That whether it is our food, whether it is our speech, whether it is our culture, whether it is our traditions, it is something that we project, for which we demand a rightful place. And that I can tell you, the rise of a civilization again on the world stage, that is something which the world knows about India. So what are the challenges? I would say there are three big challenges. One, to progress further, to build on all this, it's important that we be Atmanirbhar. Atmanirbhar, not that we should be protectionist, not that we should say, oh, everything abroad is bad and everything must be made in India. Atmanirbhar means the key things, the core things, what we should be doing for our people, what we are capable of doing. If you take the defense budget, 10 years ago, we were importing, all sorts of things. Today, you can actually see, as a result of Make in India, that, it could be clothing, it could be weapons, it could be artillery. Once you actually start tapping your own people, your own talent, we look at drones. Today the Indian armed forces are relying on the talent and skill of young Indians really to invent and deploy drones for national security. So how do you actually make a more Atmanirbhar India? Because if we depend on outside imports, it's not just bad for trade. It can be dangerous to national security. That countries can take advantage at moments of crisis. What we saw during COVID, when actually, there was a spike in the demand of PPEs and ventilators and masks. The second is, how do we leapfrog? And that is where I think particularly the contribution of Karnataka and Bengaluru is there. How do you deploy new technologies? How do you change the mindset of people? How do you create a different work culture, a different economic culture? And the third, of course, is the national security challenges. How do we continue to respond decisively to not just, what happens on our borders or terrorism? Because there will also be efforts to sow discord within our society. There will be attempts to undermine our morale. Today, in a globalized world, there are different ways by which ill-wishers can influence events. So it is something that we need to be very, very conscious of. So the point which my message to all of you today is, there is a world out there that is very different. It is a world which is looking at us with much greater, I would say, sense of partnership, much greater interest of cooperation. But we also need to look at the world differently. The world today is much more of a global workplace than it has been. Every country today, every developed country today is actually trying to interest us in how do we get our skills and talents. In recent months, we have done agreements with a number of European countries, Germany, Austria, France, Portugal. The second, the world will be a tech place, increasingly a tech place. There's nothing today in manufacturing which is happening without some kind of embedded technology in it. The world will be much more a services-driven economy. The world will be a stronger supply chain. Supply chains, we have a chance to participate in it. And the world will be a place where there will be an interest in collectively shaping our future. So I actually would impress on you the point which Tejasvi ji made. Foreign policy is not something abroad. if we did not handle the Ukraine issue right, each one of you would be paying so much rupees more for the petrol that you fill in every day. If we did not get our relationships right, we had to find even new sources of cooking oil, because Ukraine was one of the largest suppliers of sunflower oil to India. So we had to go around the rest of the world finding some other source, and we found a lot of it in Latin America. If we do not, for example, attract global manufacturing to India, that lovely instrument on which all of us spend so much screen time, that will be much more expensive, and it will not be something which would be made in India and which would in fact incorporate features which reflect its consumer base. So the idea today that there's a world there and there is we in India, that era is over. I think the young people of this world realize it. So I am standing before you here today to share with you that sense that the world today is much more India ready, and that is what we actually are trying to use the G20 to reinforce. Because the G20, G20 has 200 meetings. The G20 has the most powerful influencers in the world. I mean, if for every meeting, if you put a few hundred people coming, when those few hundred people in every meeting go back, they are influencing what the world is thinking about us. So we have to get more world ready. The world has to be made more India ready. It is happening as we speak. But it will happen there's no it's not pre-decided. It will not happen by itself. It will require vision. It will require leadership. It will require understanding of technology. It will require, how do we overcome old thinking and vested interests. It will require you to make your choice. It will require you to make your choice, because at every step, something more is getting decided about the country. A crucial state like Karnataka, if Karnataka does fabulously, the entire country is benefited. And that is the consideration with which today I ask you to look at the world. I want to say that when I go out and I talk to people, for me occasions like this are hugely helpful, because when I go around the world and say, look, I meet young people, I listen to their ideas, their questions, I see their optimism, their interest. It is something which makes an impression in the world, because we are seen today as a country of the future. We are seen as a country with a future. And that future is something which all of you have to decide. Once again, I thank you very much today for the opportunity to share this.
Please subscribe to Nationalist Hub English channel for more interesting videos, and don't forget to like and share this video. Nationalist Hub, it's a news revolution.